Welcome back to the Pipe Cottage. This is Alan Harrelson with a very, very special guest here this evening, Dr. Malcolm Gite from England. Now, many of you know that I am a great, great fan of this gentleman, and he and I have a mutual love for the work of Wendell Berry and for the art of pipe smoking. And we are both members of the kingdom. We both are extremely interested in questions of the eternal. And so, Malcolm, it's such a privilege and an honor to have you with us here this evening. And thank you, sir, for coming on for just a little bit.
Well, it's a pleasure. I've enjoyed your Pipe Cottage videos. One of the things I feel that's part of the charm and blessing of a pipe is that, generally speaking, it slows you down and you take away the hurry and stress of life. And one of the things I like about the way you do things in your stuff, you have a wonderfully slow and measured and reflective delivery, as it were, with pauses to taste the tobacco and so on. So I like that. I like to step out of the bustle a little bit. I almost feel that the very act of lighting a pipe is to remove yourself from the swift stream and get into the more interesting little slow eddies on the side of the river, you know?
Yes, of course. Yes, sir. Well, so Malcolm, I know that you recently made a video about a recent collection of essays. And in that collection, you included an essay about pipe smoking. And you also included a poem that you have published before, Smoke Rings from My Pipe. And
yes,
so,
indeed.
And I don't want to recap too much of that video. If people are interested in that, they can go to your channel and they can listen to you actually recite that essay. But I want to find out more about your personal pipe journey. What are your influences when it comes to pipe smoking, and how did you get started in it, and when did you start smoking the pipe?
Well, it goes back quite a long way for me. I'm 65 now, and I think, it's hard to remember exactly, but I think I probably tried my first pipe at the age of 19. Now, I was then, and still am now, because it's a long-term literary relationship for sure, a great fan of the works of Tolkien. My father read The Hobbit to me when I was a boy, doing it with wonderful voices. And of course, so there was a little bit of pipe smoking in The Hobbit, and even more in The Lord of the Rings, which I read for myself in my mid-teens. And like most sort of slightly truant schoolboys of my age, of course, we all tried smoking cigarettes, and it was the cool thing to do. And people smoked behind the woodsheds at school, but I never really got on with it. And I found that kind of inhaling the tobacco didn't suit me. So when I was 19, I had what we call a gap year between school and university. At the end of school, I'd very fortunately won a competitive scholarship to Cambridge, but it didn't happen until the next academic year. So I had nearly a whole year, what we call a gap year, to do other things. And I worked a bit to make some money. And then I decided to do a long, slow ramble around Ireland, because I love Ireland and all things Irish. And I decided that when I got there, I would also take up pipe smoking. And I bought a Peterson. I wonder if I should have looked it out. I probably have it still somewhere. I bought a very simple, fairly small Peterson system pipe, such that I could afford. It wasn't one of the ones with silver bands or anything. It was a really standard, Cap and Peterson pipe. And I didn't have anybody to guide me. I more or less taught myself how to do it. And I made lots of mistakes at first and packed it too tight and was continuously relighting and so on. But I had at least been advised that one of the things about pipe smoking is that you don't inhale and that you draw on it and savor it and just let it go. And so I took this pipe with me in my backpack, and I spent 3 or 4 months doing a kind of walk around Ireland, kind of finding Ireland and to some degree finding myself. And the reason why I bought the Peterson was that one of the texts that I'd read studying English literature and really liked, I still like it though for different reasons now, At that time, I should say, I wasn't a Christian. I was a sort of, I suppose I would have been pretentious and called myself an existentialist. I had a very strong sense of the absurd. But one of my favorite authors, therefore, was Samuel Beckett and the play Waiting for Godot. And there's a rather amazing scene involving, by name, a Peterson pipe in the second act of that play, where a character called Pozzo comes on and he's lost his pipe and he laments it. He says it was a genuine Cap and Peterson. So that's how I knew the name. And I bought this Peterson pipe and eventually, in the course of my long rambles, learned how to smoke it. And I was very happy that some years later, when I went up to Cambridge, and I ended up acting in a one of the Cambridge theatre groups, a production of Waiting for Godot, and they were looking for props, and they said, we need Pozzo's pipe, and I was able to produce that very pipe and give it to them. So my pipe, which had been inspired by the play, actually became a prop in the play in the end. In those far off days, you could actually smoke on stage, but not that I played Pozzo. I played a character called Lucky. So I began in Ireland, and I think that's one of the reasons why I've had a lifelong love of Petersons as pipes. I have some other pipes. I have a couple of Savinellis, and I have one or two other makes, but I have some Meerschaums, but most of my pipes are Petersons. So it was partly this play, but of course the other thing I was reading, and here's attention, Beckett, as you know, is in some senses a very despairing writer and has a bleak view of things. We're all keeping an appointment that will never be kept, you know, and here we are constantly tinkering on the brink of the absurd with an expectation that will never be fulfilled. I mean, that's what's going on in that play. And that's, lots of teenagers feel like that anyway. So, you know, it sort of spoke to me. But the other keen influence, which was really baptizing my imagination, was the influence of Lewis and Tolkien. And so I suppose when I first smoked my pipe, there was something in me hovering between Bilbo and Gandalf, as it were. And of course, later in The Lord of the Rings, I think one of the most moving scenes in The Lord of the Rings is in the chapter called Flotsam and Jetsam, where after these huge, you know, massive sort of cosmic events and great epoch-changing battles have happened, Merry and Pippin end up, when they're sort of besieging, you know, Orthanc and various bits and pieces of the wizard Saruman stuff, and they find a cache of his tobacco, which he's been secretly getting from the Shire, and they light their pipes. And amidst the crash of empires, here are these two ordinary hobbits, you know, hobbit soldiers, as it were, on the edge of things, renewing their memories of the Shire and all the things that were worth fighting for in the first place, and smoking their pipes. And I remember reading years later that both Lewis and Tolkien had been young officers on the Western Front in the Great War. And I wondered whether this moment of solace and comfort on behalf of a couple of weary foot soldiers smoking their pipe on the edge of ruin wasn't perhaps a memory back to some moment in the trenches, you know, for Tolkien and Lewis. So yes, of course that becomes a bond between them and Theoden says he would like nothing better than to hear their pipe lore. Yes. So I think pipes were already dipped and glamoured, to borrow a phrase of Seamus Heaney's, from two very different sources. I have to say the Tolkien is far more important to me than the Beckett.
Yes.
But I don't forget the Beckett.
Well, so, that is extraordinarily fascinating. I think that many pipe smokers, particularly if they are in the Christian world, they are very much aware of Lewis and Tolkien and Spurgeon, Chesterton, a lot of these other people. Yeah. Is there something?
On the side of the Atlantic, Mark Twain was a great pipe smoker.
Ah, yes, indeed, sir, indeed. Well, I don't know if you mentioned that you had experimented with cigarettes as a teenager. I don't know if you've ever smoked a cigar or not, but
I do. Yes, I like cigars.
Is there something special about pipe smoking in particular that is more attractive than cigarettes or cigars per se?
Well, I think it's very much more attractive than cigarettes, partly because, I mean, you can obviously, you know, cigarettes can become addictive and you end up chain smoking. But what I notice about cigarette smokers is that whilst they're smoking, they don't appear to be aware of what they're doing. They're getting a nicotine fix, but they're not paying any attention to the moment. You hardly ever see a cigarette smoker take a drag and pause to reflect on the glories of the world and the particularities of the taste. You don't get that. So it seems to me a much more, as it were, utilitarian thing. And I've always gone for beauty over utility on the whole. The other thing, I used to try and defend my pipe smoking to friends who disapproved or commented on it. And I would say, well, some people would say that the reason why people smoke cigarettes is partly to kind of consumption of nervous energy. It's literally to have something to do with their hands and to be going on. There's a bit of energy channeled into that. And I said, well, if you're looking for something that occupies your hands and your nervous energy, a pipe is much better, because the whole business of cleaning it, loading it, you know, getting it packed rightly, lighting it, toasting it a bit, lighting it again. So I think there's a very sharp distinction between pipe smoking and cigarette smoking. I think the distinction is less sharp when it comes to cigars.
Right, right.
Cigars are of their very nature. Well, like pipes, you don't inhale cigars. And also, so you're very much focused on the taste rather than the hit, although obviously they have an effect on you.
Yes. Well, so
but, they speak of leisure, don't they, cigars? Cigars, there's something celebratory about a cigar. And if you have a serious cigar, which is going to take quite a long time to smoke, then it shows that you've at least, in the midst of the pell-mell and the rush, you've secured sufficient leisure for that. And therefore, the cigar speaks of leisure. I used to, when I first smoked pipes, I was quite sort of pernickety about only smoking them in leisure. And, you know, they therefore stood for leisure. I have to say, later on, when I became a writer, I began to find that the meditative reflex and the pausing to light and were very, very helpful in my writing process. So I do smoke them while I'm writing as well now.
Well, so there has been, you spoke of people who disapproved of your pipe smoking. In the United States, especially in the South, and I include our part of Kentucky as a part of that, there is this very strong evangelical Christianity that opposes the consumption of alcohol and any type of tobacco use at all. And I often encounter people on my channel and who are interested in the pipe cottage, people from various Christian backgrounds in this country who are sort of closet pipe smokers. They do, they do not allow that part of their life to be publicized. What would you say to people in the Christian community who enjoy pipe smoking but are concerned about how other people in the Christian community observe that?
Well, I suppose if you're speaking particularly of evangelicals who are obviously wanting to take the scriptures very seriously as a guide to life, obviously the Holy Scriptures have nothing to say about pipe smoking whatsoever.
Right.
It wasn't a phenomenon at any of the times that the scripture was written. So you have to consider things that the scripture says more generally. And what I think the scripture counsels is temperance in its true and original meaning, which is to be temperate in all your bodily habits. Temperance is not the same thing as total abstinence. I think Christians are right if they feel that any of the pleasures of this world, whilst good in themselves and created by God, might become an idol, might become a distraction, might become a diversion from putting first things first. I mean, the great watchword, it seems to me, of Jesus' teaching is, seek ye first the kingdom of God. People quote the first half of it, but of course that's only half of Jesus' saying. Jesus is saying, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you.
Yes.
C.S. Lewis put that very beautifully in an essay called First Things, where he said, put first things first, and you get the second things thrown in. But if you put second things first, you don't even get the first, you don't even get those. They go foul on you. So I think that's why I think, I mean, as it happens, I feel slightly hypocritical saying this because we are actually now in Lent. And I have occasionally given up tobacco for Lent. It happens I haven't given it up for this particular Lent. But I do occasionally give it up for Lent, not because I think it's a bad thing, but because I think it's a good thing, which I need to remember is second to the kingdom. So I spend a period not doing that thing And of course, my desire to do it then becomes a prompt to prayer. And I can pray instead of smoking, and that's a very good thing, and it deepens my prayer life. But I will take it up again on those Lents that I happen to give that up after Easter with renewed zest and zeal, because I didn't lay it aside because it was a bad thing. I laid it aside because it was such a good thing that it might, for a moment, interpose itself as a lesser or secondary good before the primary good, which is God himself, because he is, as the philosophers say, the summum bonum, the sum of all good. But if he's the sum of all good, then he's also the source of all good.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
think the tobacco plant is there as a solace for mankind.
Yes.
Having said that, I think there are serious ethical issues around how it's grown, who grows it, what they're rewarded with for their labor, whether a laborer on a tobacco farm can afford to keep his family. That's a really important issue to me.
Yeah.
And I think those things need to be borne very strongly in mind. And obviously, there's a very shadowed side to tobacco plantations as to other things in the times that there were enslaved labor. So I think a man who enjoys anything, whether it's good food or good wine or good tobacco, you know, or just a good road to walk on, must always be mindful of the labor of those who brought these things to him, because they are also equally children of God and beloved of Christ. So I think in any consumption, a Christian will always have regard to the producers as well as the consumers. But it's interesting that you raised the religious question, which of course is a real question. I mean, the thing that's normally raised on my side of the Atlantic by those who wag their fingers and disapprove is the health question.
Yes.
Now, partly, I suppose, I mean, this is anecdotal, it's not properly statistical, but I look at all the great writers in particular who've inspired me and who were pipe smokers. We've already mentioned Tolkien and Lewis and Mark Twain. But there are many others as well. And I think Stevenson, amongst others. Tennyson, certainly. Tennyson was a huge pipe smoker, and as a poet, I greatly admire. And I mean, just at a purely personal level, I see them not only having not done them any harm, but done them really quite a deal of good psychologically.
Yes.
Also, I've always felt pipes, another thing that anybody who buys anything, consumes anything, should be concerned about is the way it's advertised. I think a great deal of the advertising industry is fundamentally immoral and corrosive.
Oh, absolutely.
People sell, you know, people now use sex to sell anything, but they'll now sell you a cup of coffee framed by the idea that the coffee is accompanying some illicit affair. And of course, back in the day, cigarettes and to some extent cigars used to be advertised as manly in the sense that they would make a man more attractive to women, which is slightly dubious advertising, and I think probably not the case. But one of the things I loved about Peterson was the original slogan of Peterson's, and I'm sure you know, was a chap, not a young, glamorous James Bond type, but a sort of looked like a sort of elderly clergyman, really, sitting with his pipe. And the slogan was, Peterson, the thinking man's pipe.
Oh.
Isn't that glorious? It's not, you know, the hot man's pipe or the successful man's pipe or, you know, the playboy's pipe. It was the thinking man's pipe. You know? And I think it's really good advertising. On the health side, obviously, I think the fact that you don't inhale is significant. I think the aroma of pipe tobacco is generally more pleasing to others than the aroma of cigarettes. And I think you have to smoke sensitively. And of course, it's now forbidden to us to smoke in pubs, which is a great loss in my view. I remember the days when we could do that.
Well, so
the suppression, as it were, or the disapproval creates a kind of brotherhood amongst those who still enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Malcolm, where do you enjoy your pipe? Do you smoke primarily in your library? Do you smoke when you're walking? Or what is your...
Primarily in my library. I'm in this little study now. I also have a hut at the bottom of the garden, which I only use generally in the warmer months, though I now have a little heater and a light in it, which is my kind of writing shed. And I smoke cigars there, and I smoke the more pungent tobaccos. I smoke the darker kind of English blends. My wife is happy for me to smoke in my study in the house, but really prefers that I smoke the aromatic tobaccos.
Well,
So right now, for example, I'm smoking a Kendall Black Cherry, which is a very nice aromatic, English aromatic. But of course, they come in tins, and now the government insists on putting, odious photographs of the sort of rotting insides of people and huge
yes.
black ones, which disfigure the thing. But you can buy old tobacco tins. I have one here with a lovely picture of the Norfolk Broads from an old railway poster of the 20s or 30s.
Mhm.
And so I take the tobacco out of the original tin and put it in this one. And a pouch, of course. So I think, yeah, I smoke those here. I do occasionally take a pipe out and walk. In fact, I've got into the habit. There's a lovely bit of woodland just near where we live, and I walk about 3 times a day. It's my main form of exercise, and I often compose poetry when I'm walking. And there's a lovely little place at the center of this wood where there's a bench put round a tree, and I will sometimes stop on my walk. I used to walk and smoke at the same time, but I now find that I'm not really enjoying the tobacco, and I'm not so now I tend to take the pipe with me, and about halfway through the walk, I sit down and rest, and I'm still, and I smoke a pipe, and then I walk on.
Well, that is quite the same thing as what I tend to do. I have tried to walk and have a pipe at the same time. It's called lunting here. I didn't know that that was such a word, but apparently there's a lunting society here in the United States, made up entirely of people who are interested in the act of walking and pipe smoking at the same time.
Great feat of coordination. So
Yeah,
lunting, how's that spelled? Lunting?
yes, that's how it is.
You know the origin of that word is. I mean, it's an
I
interesting word.
have absolutely no idea. I have never looked into the provenance of the word itself. But you were speaking about the act of writing. You like to smoke a pipe when you are writing. Do you find that smoking a pipe is an essential part of the writing process for you? Because you are a very accomplished Christian poet and essayist at this point, very accomplished. What part does
It has become more so. I used to write, sometimes I used to write and smoke as a reward for having finished, a page or two. But it gradually, I suppose, step by step, it became part of the thing. Again, I think, I mean, obviously, my main mode of writing is poetry, and unlike a number of contemporary, unlike most contemporary poets, I use form. I'm really interested in rhythm and meter and rhyme schemes and patterns. I write sonnets and villanelles. So I'm writing in a kind of rhythm. And I think most pipe smokers would say that when you're in the right place with a really good pipe and you're in the zone, there's a kind of rhythm in the pipe smoking too. So I have that. Now, C.S. Lewis smoked when he wrote, but he had another rhythm going on because, C.S. Lewis wrote with a pen. But by the time Lewis was flourishing as a writer, there were perfectly good fountain pens available. Indeed, an essayist from the generation before Lewis, Hilaire Belloc, has a fantastic essay called On the Pleasure of Taking Up One's Pen,
yes,
which is all about writing with a Waterman fountain pen. But
mm-hmm.
interestingly, right to the end of his life, Lewis insisted on using dip pens. So he had an inkwell in front of him, and he had a pen that was just the nib and a stalk. And obviously, every sentence or two, you had to dip it back in and renew the ink. And Lewis maintained that he could think and sustain a thought for as long as the dip pen wrote. And in the very act of lifting the pen from the paper, dipping it in the inkwell and returning it to the paper, he had conceived and brought forth in his mind the next sentence.
Yeah.
So there was that thing. And I certainly find that with pipe smoking, when I'm writing, I quite often have to renew the pipe or light it or clean it or whatever. And that those little gaps where I take my hand from the pen and lay it down and attend to the pipe, whilst I'm physically occupied with the front, the top part of my mind is doing that. And it's therefore pacified. Its attention is given there. And I think the best writing comes when the writer's conscious attention is removed somewhere else. And the deeper stuff that comes from the unconscious or from the soul or the spirit or those places in which the heart finally is able to move up into the head. That can happen when your eyes are elsewhere. So I sometimes find that after having tamped or relit or refilled my pipe, I return to the page and I've got something.
Yeah.
I wasn't consciously thinking while I did the pipe about what the next thing was, but miraculously, when I return with the lit pipe and the pen in hand, it flows.
Well, what you're describing to me reminds me a lot of the American writer Shelby Foote, who has written, in my opinion, the greatest work on the American Civil War that's ever been produced. And he wrote with a dip pen. He composed 3 volumes of history over the course of 20 years using a dip pen. And he was, as you say, an inveterate pipe smoker, to borrow from the beginning sentence of your recent essay. And he often had people to ask him why he did not use a typewriter. He said, well, it's kind of akin to General Lee or General Jackson. They were often asked why they did not use the repeating rifle in the Confederate Army. And they didn't want to use the repeating rifle. He said they wanted to use a single shot rifle because it taught the soldier the value of the individual shot. And the same could be said for that Shelby Foote related the dip pen to that story. And so he had a bout with cancer when he was in his 70s, and doctors told him he had to give up cigarettes and pipes. He said, well, I'm going to give up my cigarettes, but I'm not about to give up my pipes. That would be losing a part of my identity. He said his doctor fairly well understanding of that. But what you're saying here reminds me of other writers here in the South. And I think of William Faulkner, who often smoked My Mixture 965. And that was actually when he died. It's my understanding that old tins of My Mixture 965 from Dunhill were located in his home in rather copious amounts.
Very good. So, I'll tell you something. There was a time some years ago when I was having various health concerns and seeing my doctor, and I had a very good doctor, Christian doctor in Cambridge, and she, I suppose, just because it was on the script, that this is what you're supposed to say from the NHS when you tick the box, do you smoke? And I say, well, yes, I smoke a pipe, but, it's an occasional thing and I don't inhale that. And she said, well, I think perhaps you should give it up for a while. And I did indeed try to give it up for a while, and but then I was writing. It was lovely to have a doctor who reads your poetry. And my doctor read my poem about smoke rings from my pipe. And the next time I saw her, she said, I think this pipe does you far more good psychologically than it does you any ill physically. So I'm going to unofficially retract my advice and suggest you keep smoking it. It was a happy day. I'm sure she said that off the record, but it was good enough for me.
Well, there was a video posted recently on YouTube by a dentist here in the United States, and he's been a dentist for 29 years. He says he's only seen 6 cases of oral cancer in thousands of patients that he's had. And 5 of those cases had 2 things in common. Heavy alcohol use, actually alcoholic abuse, and then cigarettes. None of it involves cigars or pipe smoking. Just chain smokers who are addicted to cigarettes. And what this medical doctor had to say was that he recognizes absolutely no health risk from pipe smoking. Now, of course, I would add an addendum to that. All things in moderation.
Exactly. And I sometimes have to repeat myself. As it happens, I've just been doing a very intensive piece of writing over the course of some months. I'm working on an epic about the Holy Grail, and I've just brought it, or this first very large part of it, to a conclusion. And while I was writing that, I was smoking. And because I was writing it a lot, I was smoking a lot. And I have said to myself, and occasionally my wife will say to me, keep a track of how many pipes a day you have, just be aware. And therefore there are times that I will hold back. And I think that's a good thing to do, because of course, when you've not had a pipe on several occasions where your mind has prompted you to have one, the time you finally do have it and say, well, I'll have one now, it's almost like you're young again. You're enjoying it as though for the first time.
Yes.
I mean, there's something to be said, even in pipe smoking, or what is said of affairs of the heart, that absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Absolutely. Malcolm, what is your typical routine with your pipe smoking? Do you have one in the morning, one in the afternoon, or at night? What is your daily routine with your pipe?
Well, that's an interesting one. I tend to have one mid-morning. I walk the dog and then I go for a walk, and I tend to do my prayers when I'm on my walks. I come back, I make myself a cup of coffee. I deal with anything immediate. And there's usually a gap between, say, 10 and 10:30. When, having dealt with some routine things, I'm going to say from 10:30 or from 11 till 1, I'm going to do some proper writing. And I'll smoke a purely meditative pipe at about 10:30. By purely meditative, I mean I won't do anything else. I won't smoke and write or smoke and do emails. I will simply smoke.
Yeah.
And I usually have the second cup of coffee by that. And I have to think that coffee, I mean, there are some things which combine very well with pipe smoking, some things don't. Coffee and whiskey combine very well with it.
Yes.
I would never, under any circumstances, smoke a pipe while drinking wine. I mean, it's just a completely different thing. And I like wine. I like, good claret. But I would want to have a completely cleansed palate before I even approached a claret. So I would never drink it with wine. But in the morning, obviously, I don't drink, before the sun is over the yardarm, as they say, and the Navy. So I would have a coffee. I'd have one coffee first, and then a fairly strong coffee, smoke the meditative pipe, and then get to work on the writing. And then usually at some point into the writing, I'll have a second pipe. When a natural break comes in the writing, I'll light the second pipe, and then I'll carry on with that pipe while writing. So I generally have 2 pipes in the morning. And then in the afternoon, again, I walk the dog, and I go for a slightly longer walk through the woods. And I might have a pipe in the middle of the walk in the woods. And then I'll have a sort of late afternoon pipe. I tend not, unless there's a special occasion like this one, or I'm meeting with friends, and I tend not to smoke. I mean, I know some people have lovely evening tobacco mixtures, but I tend not to smoke. I certainly don't smoke late in the evening or just before bed as an act of charity to my wife, but it probably means I have 3 or 4, possibly sometimes 5 pipes during the day. And again, that also depends on the pipe. I have larger and smaller bowls,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm smoking a Peterson Sherlock Holmes Lestrade at the moment. I'm about to lay it aside and pick up a different one, but so that's a fairly full bowl.
Yeah.
I've got bigger bowled pipes, but I've also got some smaller ones. I mean, this lovely, I don't know, you are smoking a Peterson there. It looks like it might be a spigot.
Yes, I am smoking a Peterson 408 New Grain Spigot, and this is my favorite line of the Peterson variety.
I think so. I have a Peterson spigot here, to which I'm probably about to shift, but it has the smaller bowl.
Yes,
and yeah.
Do you enjoy those P-lip stems?
I do, yeah. I have a few. This is a P-lip on this one, but I have a few system pipes, and of course the P-lip is part of the system there.
Yeah.
I've got a cup. But the other thing with my pipes is, and I also smoke occasionally church wardens, because the church wardens very much remind me of my Tolkien aspirations, as it were.
Yes.
So I often, when I'm reading Tolkien, I almost always smoke a thing. But in fact, most of my pipes, I tend to buy pipes on celebratory occasions or in association with certain things.
Right.
So this is my C.S. Lewis pipe, because I bought it at the pipe shop in Oxford, which, although it's changed its name, was nevertheless once patronized by Lewis and both Tolkien. And I have, I got it here. That's my Tolkien pipe, which I bought in the same shop. And there are other pipes. I have a very nice Peterson system, also in this kind of round apple shape. So on the other thing, which I bought on the occasion of the publication of my biography of Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Yes.
And again, it was a sort of a memento of that. And when I travel to the States, which I do quite frequently, I sometimes buy pipes in particular places. I have a nice Peterson with a flat bottom that you can rest on things, which I bought in Nashville. And I have a very good little, what's one of my favorites is a very small bowl, little Peterson flame grain, which I bought in Dallas of all places.
Where in Nashville did you buy a pipe? Do you recall?
There's a really good pipe shop, which I was taken to by a chap called Tom Gulotto, who's a friend of the great guitar player Phil Kagi, who's also a pipe man and a C.S. Lewis fan. I can't remember the name of the store, although I've been there twice. It was very good. It was a proper pipe shop, you know. It had.
So you were there, and you read your poetry on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, that was an amazing experience. Because although, you know, a lot of people would see me as a very archetypal Englishman, which I suppose in many respects I am. Nevertheless, I have a sort of take great pleasure in American music, and particularly in what you might think of as roots country. I don't like the particularly sheeny, what I think they used to say, countrypolitan, you know.
Yeah,
I like, you know, I listen to Hank Williams and the Carter Family, and I like bluegrass music, of course. Well, you're from Kentucky, the very spiritual home of bluegrass.
Yes, sir. I had a daddy raised me to play a 5-string banjo and a flat top guitar, and so I've been.
Well,
playing
you're very fortunate. So
I
love that music. So Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs and you know, all of that means a lot to me. So playing at the Opry was great. I'm hoping next year, well, no, this year in September, to I'm hoping that one of the things for the Gettys that I'm doing for their singing conference, one of the concerts of that is going to be actually at the Ryman. And I've never been to the Ryman yet, which is, as I understand, the mother church of country music.
Oh, yes, sir. They wouldn't lying. Who told you that?
Yeah. So I'm really, I mean, I would be joyful just to take an ordinary tour of the place, but it looks very much as if in September I'm going to stand on the stage of the Ryman and recite poetry. And if I'm really lucky, somebody will pass me a guitar and I might play one of my songs. So that would be, as they say, I think, a bucket list.
Well,
so I love English folk music, and I like Irish and Scottish folk. Well, and of course, there's a link between Irish and Scottish folk on the one hand, right, and bluegrass on the other.
I gave a lecture several years ago, probably 10 years ago now. When I was first starting with my doctoral dissertation, I had toyed with the idea of writing about the connection between the British border ballads and that balladry tradition and Appalachian folk music, which was what we call old time music and what becomes bluegrass music in the 1940s. Yeah. And there's a wonderful connection there between those two places. Appalachian.
There is, absolutely. And those border ballads, they're very important to me. They were, well, some of them were collected by Bishop Percy right back in the 18th century, but the person who really put them together was the great Sir Walter Scott. You know, before his fame with all the other things in the novels, he published, I have it in the first edition, although it's falling to pieces. He published 3 volumes of the border ballads. Now, I've been and you know, I always amaze me when Americans talk about these dark Appalachian ballads, you know, murder ballads. And I'm thinking, well, I can tell you where that's coming from. You know, that's the border reivers.
That's right.
I was rereading those because my latest and in some sense current poetic project is a retelling of some of the great Arthurian stories, but in ballad form, using the ballad meter and the ballad form and various extended bits of verses. I've just finished the whole cycle of the Grail poems. And, you know, you only learn poetry by hearing it and listening to it. You know, poetry and music are very closely allied because poetry has the rhythm and rhyme as well. And so I soaked myself. I partly chose the ballad form because I'd written this long book, not only about Coleridge, but about his particular poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is, of course, written in ballad form. And I was amazed rereading Scott's collection of these border ballads, how many of them I'd actually heard in America sung by old time music or, or bluegrass
Yes.
outfits.
Yes. What I discovered, I read the work of Cecil Sharp
Oh,
from
yes.
the early 20th century. And what he discovered, he read balladry and listened to balladry in England. And what he discovered in the early 20th century is that more full forms of those songs were found in the Appalachian South than what he found in England in the 19 teens.
And I'm sure that's true, because of course the great thing about the ballad is that although they can be written down, and they were written down, and they used to be printed as broadside ballads, it's essentially an oral tradition.
Yes.
Kids learn it from grown-ups who are singing it. And probably the time the kids learn it, they have no idea what the song is about, but they gradually grow into it and realize, no, this is a song about true love, and this is a song about the heights and depths. But of course, the other thing you get in American music, which is less prominent, although it's there in the Scotch border ballads and the Northumbrian ballads, is you get this beautiful dimension of faith. You get these wonderful songs which are about the journey to heaven in the end. And
well, Malcolm, I wanted to do my dissertation on this topic, but I found it to be extremely broad. It was too much. I couldn't do it all in one dissertation, because the best dissertations are the ones that are finished. And what I did was I wrote on agrarian ideology for the most part, and it focused greatly on Kentucky writers, and which brings me to our mutual appreciation for Wendell Berry. I know that many people who watch my channel and who watch your channel are interested in Wendell Berry.
Well, I think Wendell Berry is one of the greats. I mean, I know he's often more celebrated as an essayist and a novelist. But if people ask me who are the great American poets now, Wendell Berry is right up there, in the top 5 for me. I'm particularly moved by his collections of poems called the Sabbath Poems. There's a new big volume of it called This Is the Day, I believe. And my understanding, you may know more about this than I do. I don't know much about, apart from what he reveals in the poetry, about Wendell Berry's personal circumstances. But my impression is that he's on his farm, and that on the Sabbath, he often walks up into the woods or walks around the farm, and he composed these Sabbath poems on the Sabbath day. And they've gradually accumulated,
Yes, he has a little over 100 acres in, I believe it's Henry County, Kentucky, if I'm not mistaken. And actually this past weekend, I delivered a lecture on agrarian thought at the University of Louisville here in Kentucky. And we had a pipe smoking session with several professors from around the state who attended that lecture later that evening, and several of them know Wendell Berry personally, have visited his home on several occasions. I myself have never met him. I've never corresponded with him. I almost feel like I would have nothing important to say. I mean, so many people are writing this man every day.
I've so often been tempted to write to myself, but I don't, because I've discovered, I mean, I'm not quite in the same league, but I suppose I'm well enough known now that it's so easy to get people. I get a lot of emails out of the blue from people who want to write to me because they've read my books and enjoyed them. And I have to say, at one level, I'm extremely grateful for that, and I thank God for it. But it also takes time. I want to respond. I have to say to people now that whilst I will almost always answer that first email and try and answer any questions, I can't then enter into a long correspondence.
Right.
Because if I did that with every person, I would never write another word of poetry.
I understand exactly what you're saying. Which I get that.
I don't write to Wendell, is what I'm saying, because I think he doesn't need another fan letter,
No, and sometimes people just enjoy being left alone. He knows that people appreciate his work. But I want to start drawing this to a close, Malcolm, because we are getting close to, let me see, we are about 45 minutes in, so we need to draw it to a close. I want to ask you one final question. I get many people who are in their 20s, early 30s, who contact me interested in pipe smoking. And they're not only trying to learn how to smoke a pipe, they're learning how the pipe can complement their life. can help them better achieve the type of person that they're trying to be. If you had a young man, say 23, 25 years old, came up to you and wanted you to explain how pipe smoking can complement a well-lived life, what would you say to this person?
Well, I think, particularly thinking of that younger generation, I think I'd say the single most important thing you can do to make sure that you smoke well and enjoy your pipe is to turn off your phone.
Yes.
Get offline.
Yes.
You know, that is where maybe where a lot of fascination is coming from, your menu. But, you know, I wrote a poem when I first got one of these smartphones. I got an iPhone. I had a feeling that, you know, this was both a great boon, but a potential corrosion. And I wrote a little poem called Iode, which was to my phone. And it had this line, this little verse in it. It went, I am familiar with 100 faces, all famished for their 15 minutes fame. I am half present in 100 places, but never present in the place I am. So I would say, switch off the phone, be present to the pipe, let the pipe be present to you. And paradoxically, in the very act of paying attention to the pipe, and I'd talk about how to pack it and, you know, to have it a little bit looser at the bottom, not to pack tightly from the bottom and looser up, but looser at the bottom and a bit tighter as you go on and leave room for it to expand. And all those little bits of practical advice. But I'd say all that. No, but I'd really say while you're doing that, and you're not looking at your phone because you're looking at your pipe, your mind has a chance to recover from the constant onslaught of bits and bytes of information, most of which is designed to make you anxious. I think, you know, they have an acronym, don't they? The younger generation, which is FOMO. It's a fear of missing out. And they're constantly on the phone trying to be everywhere where it or something is happening. And I say, well, nothing is going to happen better in the next half hour than this pipe. Just be there with it. And don't think, I mean, almost the question, how is this going to benefit my life? I'd almost want to forestall that. So if all the time you're lighting your pipe, you're steadily in this slightly aggressively competitive way saying, is this improving me as a person? Like, by how many percentage points is my persona? You know, you're still not smoking the pipe. You're still back in that world, which, I mean, you know, if I can use some theological language, I wouldn't necessarily use it with every, but I think we can exchange some theological language. One of the great things to me of my understanding of a gospel of grace is this, that salvation is by grace and not by works. Mm-hmm. That there's nothing we can do or say or be. There's no infinite number of Facebook likes that is going to make God like us any better. In fact, he already loves us more than anybody on Facebook ever could do. But the thing is, we pay no attention to him, but we're constantly seeking these tiny little blips of electronic affirmation. It's a fool's game. There's no end to it. You're never going to be. There's always going to be somebody who's got more than you, and there's always going to be. So turn all that off, and let the pipe bring you into the present moment. And I think there are two distinct pleasures. There's the distinct pleasure of the solitary pipe, the thinking man's pipe, if you like, where your mind has been sufficiently stilled by attention to the mechanics of the pipe. And then really good thoughts, beautiful thoughts emerge, moments of appreciation emerge. You begin to see the world in a better way. And that then becomes associated with the pipe, so that the next time you smoke the pipe, you're more in that mood of appreciation. So that's the solitary pipe. But I think the thing which is rather more endangered because of all the laws that stop us from smoking together socially and in common social places like pubs or, but at least we can sit in sheds or we can invite each other to each other's homes. And there are some places, I know in America, there's only one in Cambridge where you can go down and as long as you're apparently sampling the tobacco to buy, you can smoke it, That the second pleasure is the companionable pipe smoke, where you're smoking different blends. The different blends are moving back there. The smoke is accumulating in the air. The conversation is deepening. There's a beautiful description of something like that in C.S. Lewis's beautiful essay on friendship in The Four Loves, when he's really describing the Inklings. And And he talks about the paragraph begins, "These are the golden sessions." We spread our feet before the fire, and we have our friends, and we're all equals, and that's great. I mean, I'm old enough to have actually had the pleasure of smoking my pipe with friends and fellow Lewis and Talking scholars in the Rabbit Room, as it was called, in the Eagle and Child in Oxford before the law changed. I've sat there with a pint and a pipe, and friends with pints and pipes, in the very places where Lewis and Talking sat, and we've remembered them, and thank God for them, and we've told our own stories. Now we still meet there and have our pints, but we can't have our pipes, unfortunately. We have to go out and smoke them furtively on the bench outside. But so I would say have both of those pleasures. Enjoy the pipe yourself in person, be offline, and likewise be offline with your friends. Try and find some people that you can sit and smoke with, where you're genuinely going to give the whole of your time and attention to one another and to the smokes and to the conversation, and turn the phones off. Don't let that intervene. I think it's a natural, one of the problems of our fallen humanity is that we're easily distracted, and we spread ourselves out too thin. And almost all religious practice involves a form of collecting yourself in presence before God. I always think that one of the great phrases that rings through both the Old and the New Testament, and it's always a phrase that's used in response to the call from God. I think in Hebrew it's just hineni, but basically, here I am. That's what you say. When Abraham is called, he says, here I am. When Moses is called, he says, here I am. And I think that's become one of the most difficult things for a modern person to say to anyone, let alone to God. Here, right here I am. Because we might be physically here, but we're mentally all over the place. And I do see a pipe as a way of collecting yourself to be present in a particular place.
Malcolm, that is a perfect answer. And I knew when I asked that question that you would have a very, very good answer to it. Well, so I am going to draw this video to a close. The recording part, however, just hang on after we're done with this, and we'll talk a little bit more. But ladies and gentlemen, we are so glad that you stopped by to visit with us just a little bit. Malcolm Gite, thank you again, sir, for spending some time here with us on the Pipe Cottage. And ladies and gentlemen, this is Alan Harrelson. Until we have a chance to meet again, I will bid you adieu. Thank you for stopping by.
Thank you very much. It's been good to be your guest.